there. And he posts a lot of things, including on Twitter, X, and Blue Sky. And besides being a doomer, he's actually informs us greatly about the state of climate by posting lots and lots of data in all different forms, and does a lot of other interesting things that we'll probably get into. But let's start off. But Eliot, why don't you start off and just give us a little bit of your background, which is, I think, a little different than people might expect.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Dan, for having me back on. It's been a while, and I really appreciate the opportunity, especially to talk about my favorite topic, doomism. So, yeah, I started out PhD in mathematics, professor of mathematics for about 15 years at a small university in Ohio. Left that, got a position as a visiting associate professor of computer science at UC Santa Barbara, eventually turned into a lecture position. I somehow found my way into the casino industry and spent 10 or 15 years doing work for the industry, not against it, for it, as an expert in casino games, specifically ways to beat casino games. And I traveled internationally informing security, surveillance, floor managers, and everyone else on what they were missing, how players were beating them. And I retired in 2017, had a couple of volunteer gigs. COVID hit, and I was looking for something else to do with my life because I couldn't do anything. And yeah, I just sort of got back to my roots, my childhood roots, loving climate. I actually took my first course in meteorology in the summer before I started college. So between my high school year and first year of college, was always interested in that growing up. So I found my way back to it and quickly discovered that the best fit for who I am is what's sort of known as a doomer. So that brings me here today.
Okay, very good. Well, why don't we just kick it off? I mean, we have a lot to talk about doomerism, but I think a good place to start would be actually this PNAS article, quote, let me put a quote research paper. I'll put that in quotes.
They use a lot of quotes in this paper also.
Yeah, they use a lot of quotes themselves. Titled Psychological Inoculation Against Climate Doom. And man, I read through this thing and looked at the background data. Anyway, I'll let you comment on it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this paper and what brought you to respond to this?
Well, you know, every so often there's a research paper that comes out that directly attacks doomers. And it usually comes from a sociology perspective, which means some experiment is conducted where there's some doom is presented, and then some neutral thing is presented, and then some action step happens or doesn't happen as a result of this short-term experience people have. And in this paper, what they do is they show headlines, and there's sort of three classes of headlines. There's neutral headlines that have nothing to do with climate. There's the headlines that are from actual sort of papers out there that are considered educational, correct headlines. And then there's these fabricated, over-the-top headlines about humanity's doomed, there's nothing we can do, why even do anything type of headlines. And people are asked, they view very short little, what they call a psychological inoculation, which is let me expose you very briefly to what we consider to be bad headlines. And then we will have you actually experience these headlines in a sort of pseudo, well, it's like a pseudo Twitter environment.
Yes, a social media simulator.
Thumbs up or thumbs down, a media simulator. And then they sort of compare what, how well people were able to identify their really bad headlines after being exposed. And they separated it. Are you right wing or not? And so it went on and on like that.
I think what's important to mention here is that they really led the participants into flagging the certain posts a certain way, right? So it's right. They said, okay, if if the headline starts with something like scary or frightening, or then it's a doomer headline, so please flag it like that, right? And then then there was this headline, of course, within this, which they've made as a doomer headline, saying, oh no, I don't even like. We should put them up, but it's really leading. It's like really bad science. I wouldn't even call it science either.
I'll just give you an example. Here are some real ones. I'll just read them because it's a little, since we have other things to show, it's a little hard to put them up right now. This is a doomer headline. What life on Earth will look like in 2100? Cities plunged underwater and millions of people perishing in the heat. That's a doomer headline. And a standard headline is 1 in 4 properties at flood risk by 2050 due to climate change. So, by the way, I would ask myself, which one has a better chance of motivating people to action? I would think the more dramatic one would. And it's also not wrong. I mean,
right. I mean, that's one of the largest problems with this study is the question of whether these bad headlines are actual. Are they factual? Are they reasonably factual? About what the future is most likely going to turn out to be, and unfortunately, they mostly are. They're doomer. And I think one of them they chose. They actually quoted. I forget who it was. Did they quote some UN statements from 2021 that was about doom, and use that as one of their headlines that you should never have, right? So I don't know. It's just so yeah, there's a lot of things wrong with this, but what got me going was not whether I agreed or disagreed or the methodology or anything else. It was the idea that the entire study was devoted to this concept of a climate doomer. And I have trouble understanding what that means, because I live in the doomosphere, right? I know this territory really well. And I don't know any climate doomers. I don't know who that person is who thinks that it is just the climate and the climate alone that is going to be the defining factor on our future. Of course, there are people who are not so educated, who are frightened of what's going to happen with the climate, right? They might not be exposed to some of the tipping points or the planetary boundaries or that sort of thing. There are some doomers who right at the outset might think, oh, it's just climate. But it takes about 5 minutes to get deeper than that. And yet, everything Michael Mann writes, everything Catherine Hayhoe writes, everything Hannah Ritchie writes, right? All of the doom bashing out there is about this straw man idea of a climate doomer. And I mean, I would ask you, Dan, do you know someone you would just say this person is a climate doomer?
Well, I think the exception we've talked about is folks like Guy McPherson, who are
except
how do you classify him?
Talk. Yeah, no, when you hear him talk, and Sam Curran is the same way, they say one of Guy's main points is that, he will talk about a tipping point, an irreversible, unstoppable tipping point. And all it takes is one unstoppable tipping point. And, he has cataloged 40 or whatever he likes to say he's cataloged. But he's right. I mean, if the, Amazon tips into savanna, if the Arctic tips into a blue ice, no ice situation, right? Any one of these things will lead down a very dark path for the planet.
Well, we should highlight, though, that the reason he is wrong is because he takes all these future possibilities and makes them immediate. So according to him, and this is not a joke, we are all going extinct this year. 2026, the human population is going extinct. And this is not a prediction from super long time ago. It's like from 2018, So, I mean, that's why, I mean, he's just such an over the top
Yeah, and
Classify him, by the way.
he's updated that to 2030, just so.
Oh, okay, good. We
to
have
be
another
fair,
4 years to go.
So,
Good. Yeah.
so my type, if you like, I have a taxonomy of doomers. My type for him is a near-term human extinction doomer.
Okay.
And there is at least 2 different NTHE Facebook groups with lots and lots of people in them. And this is a large group of people. And yes, they are primarily climate doomers because their line of thinking is that climate is going to precipitate all these other events, and they don't take into consideration all of the other systems that are being impacted right now, or the social, general social decline that's going on. So yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. When I thought about that question, he and Sam Krenn are the closest 2 I would think of as pure climate doomers, and beyond that, I don't know any.
But the thing is, they get a lot of attention, and when the right wing says, "You guys said we'd all be extinct in 2026," you're talking about this one guy who's not even a real climate scientist at all, and so he does a lot of damage, I think, in that regard.
And you just made a really good point right there. I mean, there is this whole, what do they call it? Erring on the side of least drama. Have you've heard that phrase before? So this idea that climate scientists, the worst possible outcome for a climate scientist is to make a dire prediction and have it not come true, because that gives the right all this ammunition, right? You predicted we were going to be in another ice age. This was a famous prediction of 1960s or 70s, right? These ice ages coming predictions, which of course were a little bit off base at the time. But when things are predicted that don't happen, it's used. When things aren't predicted that do happen, there's far less negative feedback, right? I mean, the flood in Valencia, Spain, we kind of know these floods are going to happen because there's so much more precipitable water, right? The atmosphere is holding so much more water vapor. What just happened in Hawaii, that wiped out the entire east coast of the Big Island with Hurricane, what was it, Lala? Was that the hurricane? Something.
In Hawaii. And another one's coming in the next. Another
one's coming, yeah. And so, that's a really good point. I want to add one other doomer to the list.
Okay. Wait, let me first add one. Wait,
what was
one
that?
Second. Can I add one?
Well, while you're doing that, Leon, your point earlier.
Nature is also a doomer, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
As Super El Nino could transform the Amazon, is the world's biggest rainforest doomed from nature. I think this is crucial, right? Because what is doom? I think we talk about doom, and this paper and many of those papers and this strawman, they paint this strawman of this individual person who says there's nothing we can do. We're all going to die, and some even call them worse than climate deniers, right? But so they paint this picture of a doomer which barely exists, and then they say Eliot is a doomer, Leon is a doomer, James Hansen is a soft doomer, right? And then and that's the problem. They create this strawman, and then they use a big brush within the same chapter of their book they are selling or whatever, and then they paint all these other people with the same brush, while these other people are merely sharing actual data and sharing the reality, like this Nature paper, right? It's like calling nature a doomer because they say factually that the Amazon rainforest might be doomed, right? And the coral reefs might be doomed, right? So there are many parts of the global of our planet and ecosystems that are based on the science already doomed. So I think that's that, and then you have this one of these authors. He said he shared, even while he was explaining why he wrote this paper. He shared this chapter of the book from a certain person you all know, who says Eliot is worse than a climate denier, right? And he says that he's a fan of this the truth is bad enough narrative. Well, of course, the truth is much worse than they are implying, and they are and these psychologists, of course, are not even climate scientists, so how can they even judge it?
By the way, but speaking of this, actually, Elliot, getting back to something you said about you have to be if you publish something that's really bad, something bad's going to happen, and it doesn't happen, you're they'll pick up on it and everything like that. But it's actually worse than that, because if you think of your academic reputation, you have to be 95% sure of something to publish a paper, right? You have to have the 2 sigma correct, because if you publish something that is wrong, which is what you're saying, not only does it cause this outside thing, but your reputation goes down the toilet. But if you don't publish something that turns out to be true, nothing happens to your reputation, which is why you keep seeing these IPCC things that it's worse than we thought. And, because they're giving you what they do tell you is going to be true. Yeah, it'll be at least 2 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century, but it might be 10, but we're only going to tell you 2, because that's what the 2 sigma thing is. And so it's really you don't want that situation unless you're talking about, black holes or something that doesn't really matter in your day-to-day life. But if you're talking about survival, you want to know how bad could it get, and they're not going to tell you that. And then when they do, that's when this article that you responded to reminds me of what happened in England when the climate protesters started saying, just stop oil. They arrested them and treated them as terrorists, right? So this is how the system responds to people telling the truth, is they publish articles saying that we have to inoculate people against these messages and things like that, even though the messages aren't wrong.
And it's worse than snake oil.
I just want to, on the English thing, I mean, one of the most remarkable things that happened in this sort of who's a doomer question was Rachel Donald was interviewing Hannah Ritchie, and they were talking about doomers. And so Rachel Donald's very sharp, and she said, tell me someone who's a doomer, name a doomer, right? Mm-hmm. And the person she came up with is Roger Hallam. Now, Roger Hallam has a website called 4billiondead.org. Right. And if ever there was an over-the-top headline, right, he will blast that out there. But it's, the context in which they're taking doomer is that it creates inaction. But if you look at what Roger Hallam is doing, right, you have never seen someone calling for action with as much
he went to jail for calling for action, right?
Right. I mean, the guy is all about action, and he's publishing these headlines, and he's someone that Hannah Ritchie named as a doomer. That's her prototypical doomer. And yes, he's a doomer because he sees what's happening with very, very clear eyes and understands the catastrophic consequences that are coming and wants to organize and do something about that, right? I mean, that's a call to action for him.
He sees the impact of inaction. That's why he's writing doomer headlines, right?
And that's why they arrested him, because he might actually create action against fossil fuels.
That's right.
And then,
that's right.
And by the way, that 4 billion dead, everyone thinks, he made that up or something like that. Comes from the University of Exeter. In their report that says, well, if we get to this temperature by this time, and I think it was 3C by 2050.
Yeah.
And it might be 3C by 2060. Maybe it'll take a little longer, but we're targeting sort of around then, right? So the number,
Well,
and then they say, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It means 4 billion dead. And it, by the way, it didn't say when the 4 billion died. It's like not during the year of 2050 or anything like that necessarily. But still, big number,
the risk.
half the human population. And that comes from a scientific paper.
Right.
And then,
how they
and then they
framed
think
it,
you're a doomer if you actually say what the paper says.
but how they framed it was these are the non-economic impacts, right? It's like 4 billion dead is a non-economic impact of.
Of course, it's that famous
impact.
cartoon of dinosaurs walking down, and they see this huge asteroid flying overhead, and the dinosaur thinks to himself, he goes, "Oh my God, the economy!" Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just wanted to point out kind of how a lot of this started, because, you know, this doomer bashing has not been going on forever. It is a relatively new phenomenon. I can't really, even though dating back to the Club of Rome or to, you know, Hanson's testimony or things like that, you should say, well, there should have been elements of doomer bashing already happening. It really started with Michael Mann, his attacks on The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, that was the core of his book, The New Climate War, was, you know, a direct attack against David Wallace Wells. And what I always found interesting, if you don't know this book, I invite you to read it, is when I read that book.
You mean from Wells?
Wells' book, yeah. When I read that book, I thought, okay, this is going to be really amazing. And then I just thought, no, we're not going to see 10C by 2100. No, you know, it's like it is so over the top. It is just short of Guy McPherson level, right? It's like, how could you stop like right before that level? And it just was like, okay, why take the worst case of every worst case and play it out into the future? You know, let's not take the bell curve and choose the most remote point. Let's just try and talk about the right half of it, right? Let's just have conversations about bad stuff rather than the worst stuff. And that's,
isn't it also very American? I think not you, but I think it's also, at least if you look at the politics, right, it's very populistic, right? Yeah. And we don't see that, like the people who are harassing me, most of them are from the United States, right? Are this because they're just like always in this crazy two-party system, crazy media circus world where they think like everything is black or white or right or wrong or whatever, and there's no like middle ground. And I think it seems like it's even worse there than here.
Well, yeah, I mean, Dan and I are here, and I for one vote that it's worse than anywhere. Maybe it's not as bad as North Korea or Russia, I don't know, but it's certainly on par with that, or it feels that way. You know, when it's, I would not. I mean, I don't feel comfortable traveling overseas. I have good friends, you know, and around the world, and it's like, yeah, don't come here. We hate Americans, you know. Kind of that feeling, you know.
Say that you're from Canada, right? That's
right. There you go.
But I want to point out one thing. It seems like this trick, like in a way, like how Donald Trump won the election, right? It's by making a lot of noise and being a populist, and I think the same is being done here, right? You have the and what we're blaming the fossil fuel industry for, right? The same is being done here by a small group of people, right? They are implying other scientists are lying while they actually share data. They call those who do the actual research, call them doomers. So they vilify them. They're leading a troll army. You don't want to know all the social media attacks and the smearing and even emails and people. I think even you got some messages, Eliot, that I shouldn't be trusted or something, right? And because we published a scientific paper and we called out someone who was smearing our paper. And
yeah, I just want to, let me just say that
I don't want to finish this.
Go.
And they make a lot of money. They make millions, I think, even. I don't know. They make millions by doing it, right?
Could be.
Yeah, like someone should look it up. But this is like the like this evil stereotype of the fossil fuel industry, and we just have these at least one person being that stereotype and pretending to be one of the good guys, or vilifying the actual scientists and pretending it's not that bad, right? And I'm not exaggerating, right? You all know this, and many who are listening to this know exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay. By the way, Eliot, let's talk a little bit about the kinds of doomers that there are, because and I guess one question you posed in your one of your Substack articles was, is Jesus a doomer? Is Jesus a doomer?
So, I mean, the revelations, right? The parts of the Bible sound very much like the sort of things that some doomers might say. But the point that I'm making there is, and this is the subtlety, right? If we look at the large spectrum of doomers, there are certainly some doomers who say, you know, in the end, all there is love, which is an excuse for not doing anything, right? Whereas the majority of doomers are out there doing whatever they can. I mean, I personally volunteer on behalf of wildlife. I'm a call taker at the local wildlife care network, among other volunteer duties. So the same goes for Christians, all right? While the majority of Christians have this idea that they are stewards of the planet, that they have an obligation to protect God's gift, right? There are sects of Christianity that are essentially doomsday sects that believe that the rapture is coming, or that you know, they're going to suddenly float off to heaven, or this is going to happen during their lifetime. And once in a while, you hear stories where they've sold off their goods. They're going to go, you know, all meet in some place and await this thing to happen. I mean, there are sects of all religions that have these sort of doomsday prophecies as part of their faith. There will be groups of people in that who think that it is happening so soon on a timeline that why should I do anything? In other words, they encourage inactivism.
And some religions, or some part of those religions, even encourage it. They want it to happen because then the Messiah will.
That's right. They think that the less we do, the worse it'll get, the more likely that the rapture will happen sooner. Right. You're exactly right.
Or even making it happen, right?
Right. They want to. So this idea that Christians have a group of them that are inactivists on the same level that deniers, all right? So you can say some Christians are worse than deniers in terms of the inactivism they create. And I think once you see it in that light, you realize that this sort of polar thing they've done to doomers like myself is absurd on its face, because doomers are just as varied in terms of their opinions about what to do with the time left as Christians are, right? And Christians will tell you, well, we don't know God's plan. We don't know when the big moment's going to happen. And so in the meantime, we have to be stewards of the land. Well, any doomer feels exactly the same, right? And even more so, because we are not taking from Genesis that the world was given to us as our oyster to abuse as we like, whereas that is part of the Christian faith, right? God has given you all the fruits and nuts from all the trees to, right? So, it's in some sense, Jesus was a doomer.
But let's go into your doomerism, because I was actually surprised when we had our last conversation. By the way, link in the description. It was called Discussion with a Doomer. It was 2 years ago or so, and I was surprised because I used the phrase pro doom or something, but pro nature. So your form of doomism, unless it's changed, was that you didn't actually want to take steps to extend humans' time on this earth because humans are so destructive to the earth. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and essentially, I am, and it's not as simple as just saying steps to preserve humans. It's explicitly create new energy sources. You know, whether it's wind or solar or geothermal or anything that's going to quote replace fossil fuels. I do have this sense that anything that accelerates growth of humans or prolongs humans is something that I'm not going to advocate. I'm not going to help out. I'm not going to be part of. On the other hand, I understand that humans will suffer, and there has to be a certain sort of managed drawdown, which I don't expect to happen. But in the great scheme of things, there would be this sort of degrowth happening, and it would be a cooperative global degrowth. Understanding that we have to give up a lot of stuff, not going to happen. So, you know, there is some idealistic world in which I see a path, but I know that's not going to happen, and that's part of the doomer thing. I mean, you have the same thing, Dan, with the tax, the Dana Nudicelli, when you had him on, you know, you were talking about the Canadian version of this, and you know that's not going to happen, right? I mean, you know it's not. And James Hansen, who wants geoengineering, he's got to know at some level that's not going to happen.
Well, that one I actually disagree with you on, because shit's going to hit the fan. Shit is hitting the fan, right? And it's certainly going to hit the fan more. We'll probably all agree on that. And then when it's really bad and people then say, hey, God, we got to do something. They have 4 choices. They can adapt, which they're going to have to do, but that won't be enough. Then they can reduce their emissions and cut and do carbon removal. And let's put those together. You can do that all you want. You're going to not notice that you did it for 30, 40 years before you kind of see it starting to have some effect, but it's not going to relieve the suffering, okay, for a really long time, way longer than the lifetime of the politicians who have to decide. And then you have SRM, sunlight reflection methods, or solar geoengineering, which work relatively cheap. You know, not that it's easy to do, but certainly within our capability to do. And it works almost immediately. So I think it's going to happen because that's the one thing that we'll be able to do that will relieve suffering quickly.
And I think the point also is how well it will work and how well we will be able to.
It'll work somewhat. It's not going to cure everything. It'll have side effects and everything, but will be way better than what's going on. And so I think we're just forcing ourselves into that corner where that's going to be our only choice, besides adaptation, which we're going to try, of course.
Yeah, and yet you have major climate scientists who are rabidly against geoengineering.
Absolutely.
Foremost among them is Michael Mann, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you're expecting cooperation between disparate parties of all political, globally, to be able to pull this off.
No, it's going to be a very different world. The Michael Manns are going to be like, people are going to look back at Michael said everything would be okay. It's not okay. He was wrong, And
so
let me clarify here.
By the time we get to the point you're talking about, the infrastructure will be so degraded that even the thought of being able to pull this off. I mean, I look at Europe this year. I mean, have you seen the satellite images of the Great Britain? Look, I mean, we should be doing it today if we're going to do it, because honestly, in 10 years, we won't have the infrastructure left to even conceive of doing this.
We're still flying 100,000 airplanes a day. We only need to fly 200 a day for solar geoengineering. So
forever, 24/7 forever.
Well, no, I mean, forever. I mean, hopefully, by the way, everyone says, oh, if you do that, you're not going to reduce emissions. No, if you do that, you have to reduce emissions, right? It kind of forces you to do that if you think about it a little bit. Anyway.
Well, can I make one thing clear? So, because you I don't know exactly how you phrased it, but you said like that James Hansen is in favor or encourages geoengineering. My name is also on the paper, and we didn't encourage geoengineering. We say
It
we
was
need to do the
nuclear.
research. We need to do
Yeah.
the research, because if we get to a point where people, where many people are dying, and it's the least bad options left, and they will try to do it, we better have done the research. And Michael Mann creates another strawman and says we want to do it, and then says I don't. And but he's a scientist, but he says we shouldn't even do the scientific research, right? He doesn't say we shouldn't. He also says we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't use geoengineering, but he also says shouldn't even do the scientific research. And I think this might be a small difference, but I think that's crucial, right? It's like we say do the research before anyone decides to do it, and the risks could be even higher than what you're trying to avoid. And you have the other side saying we shouldn't even do scientific research.
I think this is bringing up something very interesting, which is sort of what is the opposite of doomerism in this context, and that is folks who think it will all be okay if we only start reducing our emissions, which is really
if we had only
the
voted
Michael Mann
for
story, right?
Kamala, right? If we had voted for the other party,
if we voted for the other party, but that's still. I mean, it's we have. By the way, in 2 weeks, we're going to have Adam McKay on talking about.
Oh, excellent.
A paper he wrote about the biggest lie, and we still have time. And
so
and that's a lie. And these other the anti-doomers and this PNAS article, if you read it and you look at what their articles are versus the standards versus the doomers are more accurate.
You want to put them on?
And are far more likely to get action going than the standard headlines. And so they're part of this. In a sense, they're part of the let's not do anything crowd. Or let's just think about lowering our emissions and that'll be enough. I mean,
well, the thing is, they want to have this very particular sort of middle ground for which headlines are allowed and which aren't. You're only allowed to use headlines that, and then it's unspecified. And it's just about the headlines, mind you. They don't explore the content of the article. So, and they don't talk anything about the permanence of this sort of inoculation phenomena as well. So the question is, who writes the headlines? All right. And I mean, the rule of thumb is if it bleeds, it leads, right? And a lead, of course, is also a name for the headline. So it's just going to be absolutely sort of this disjointed way of thinking about the rules of what I'm allowed to do or not. And, I run into that all the time in terms of what I put up. Oh, you used an AI image, you shouldn't do that. Well, what do you mean I shouldn't do that? You're on a computer right now that's using electricity to write that message to me. Maybe you shouldn't do that. This idea that there are these sort of you should do this but not this. You should write this headline but not that headline. You should drink. You should wear this fabric but not that fabric. As if there is some fine line towards saving the planet. That
this is what you should do, Eliot. Write about PlayStation 5 supply issues finally fixing after 3 years. That's what we need you to do. Right, then everyone can be happy.
But that's one of that's one of the unrelated articles. The ones that were non-climate related.
We call these purity tests. There are all these purity tests out there. And the purity tests include not only the headlines you write, they also include, are you pro solar or pro wind? Are you, do you have electric appliances? Do you have electric water heater? Do you take public transportation? Do you eat organic? Are you a vegan? On and on and on, these purity tests, one after another. And it's all under this sort of liberal, umbrella that this is how we'll save the world. And it's all still engaged with the world. It all is not, fundamentally changing that trajectory. I'm sorry, Leon, you have those up. So
yeah, I think
No,
I thought that we're talking about these headlines, and I think it helps to show them. And like, so what they did was to me, what's the word? Inoculation.
Inoculation.
Inoculation. It's like they use all these difficult words, and they show all this data, and they write a nice paper, but they don't, in the paper they don't show what a ridiculous test they did. Right? They show this 30-second video to people, and then they call that inoculation. So they like gave them some antidote to the dangerous doom. And the control group, what did they do? They let them watch a video of how to draw a face for 30 seconds. It's like, maybe those people who watched the video on how to draw a face in 30 seconds were just confused and clicked the wrong things, right? It's like, or they were just thinking about what things they were going to draw, and they were like, and this other research, we shouldn't. The controlled group had to read a random passage of Charles Dickens or something. It's like it has nothing to do with climate, and it's
or anything.
like, what are they even doing, right? And why are they doing it?
I think they had a quota of writing papers and want to,
I think that's like, they really wanted to write these papers, and they already had a idea of what they wanted the conclusions to be, and that's why they wrote these papers. And they are really proud of these papers, and they write articles about it. It's not like these people sitting in their behind the computer and writing a paper which only 5 of their colleagues will ever read, and they don't talk about it. They publish it on social media. They write articles about it. So they are pushing this narrative that they can cure people with this snake oil, right? And
okay, but we should move on from the article though, because Eliot wants to talk about some other aspects of doomerism. Go ahead.
I just wanted to very quickly, if I could, just talk about some of the doomers that I can list out there, right?
Yeah.
And that they're not climate doomers, right? These are not climate doomers. So William Catton, right, famously wrote Overshoot. Right, that's not a climate book. That's about the whole dynamics of the planet, right? And William Rees, the ecological
on the program.
footprint. Is absolutely not a climate doomer. He understands the entirety of the ecosystem of the planet and what humans are doing, specifically through population and resources. We mentioned or didn't mention James Lovelock, right, with his Gaia hypothesis, which is, his prediction of doom, or not climate doom, is like the planet is an organism that we have thrown out of balance through the actions of humanity, and it wants to return to its balance. And part of that is going to be, this sort of tough lesson for humanity that's coming. Let's see, what else do I have here?
And everyone at the Club of Rome, right? Those who wrote.
Yeah, that was before climate was even really a big issue. That in 1972, the limits to growth.
I think that there was a graph there of CO2, but the main fear of warming was regional warming from energy production.
You had Michael Dowd. You had Michael Dowd.
Michael Dowd is certainly in there. He is a post-doom, no-gloom spiritual doomer. He didn't talk about climate specifically in any way. Or Paul Ehrlich, who is exclusively, a population doomer. Maybe you could put him in the same category with Malthus. That population will grow faster than the ability to make food. You have Sam Mitchell from Collapse Chronicles. I don't even know what to call him as a label, but he's probably a population doomer as well. He certainly advocates for not having children, and he argues that there are these graphics about a lifetime CO2 of a human, that the best way, if you want to do something for the planet, is to not have children, because it doesn't matter whether you're a vegan or not, or whether you have EVs, or how you live your life.
Biggest
if
carbon
you don't
footprint
exist,
thing you do, right, is have kids.
Yeah, if you don't exist, then that's the least amount of CO2 you can
What
create.
about Roy Scranton? Ethical pessimist doomer? What does that mean?
Well, I'm going to have to. He is a brilliant man. He wrote a book called "We're Doomed, Now What?" And he will call himself a doomer because he doesn't even know what else to call himself. But a pessimist, essentially, he just doesn't believe that humanity will find a way out, for any number of reasons he can articulate. And ethical is just this idea that you don't need a reason to be good. You don't need a reason to do good acts. It's just part of being a human, that you should be doing good acts for other people and for the planet. It doesn't matter whether you don't think we're going to get out of this. So he has a book that he just recently wrote. I've lost the name right at the moment. But yeah, at any rate, he's a brilliant, and of course Roger Hallam. I mean, a revolutionary doomer. I'm not sure what else to call him.
Catherine Ingram.
Yeah, one of my favorites of all time was Catherine Ingram, who wrote a brilliant essay back in 2019, which was all about, I think she called it The Age of Extinction or something like that. And eventually she took it down. She felt like it was just getting a little bit too out of date, but it's just brilliant. And
but you call her a grief doomer. What's a grief doomer?
She actually led online seminars once a month. And she was I don't know, she knew Leonard Cohen very well back in his Zen days. And so she kind of got that Zen thing happening, and would lead these little Saturday retreats. I attended a couple of them. And, the Gail Zawacki, who I didn't even mention here, was very much the same. They called her the Diva of Doom. She passed away, I think, in 2022.
How about Sam Mitchell, a WASF doomer?
Yeah, well, again, yeah. So that means, I don't want to use the word on your show, but we are so effed.
We are so something or other, right? Yeah.
Right, and so he had this YouTube channel called The Collapse Chronicles, and he would just read stories from the news every day, and he did that for a decade or more, where he would just chronicle. He was a journalist in his earlier days, and so he just felt like, this is what I can do, is I can just watch it happen and chronicle it day in and day out. That's how I will live out. That's the service I will do to this process. And there's Michael Rupert, who was a peak oil doomer. There's this whole peak oil thing that happened about 2008. And then there's if you go online, you find tons of AI doomers now, right? I mean, that's a huge thing that everybody. And there are all sorts of prepper organizations, people who have bunkers in Idaho and stockpile weapons. What kind of doomers are they? They're religious doomers, as we talked about before. So
Doomsday.
this spectrum of doomer, it's ancient, right? It dates back thousands of years to Revelations, right? And to suddenly pick out this one very small little thing called a climate doomer and call that, that is your sacred cow. That's the one that we're gonna put up there as the example. That essentially doesn't exist.
Which is worse than deniers.
Which are worse than this thing that may not exist, or worse than deniers, because whoever they are, Hannah Ritchie said they're Roger Hallam. They create an action, right?
Let's talk about that, because the big criticism of doomerism is that, if it's too late, there's nothing to be done, and we might as well just party or just enjoy ourselves or go for walks in nature or whatever while it's still there. Tell us, and maybe focus on yourself for a moment. How does doomerism engender action, and what kind of action? Well, Roger Hallam is a great example of revolutionary action to try to get.
Yeah, I mean, look at Max Wilbert. I mean, he was up trying to stop a lithium mine. One of the authors of Bright Green Lies. Spent months camped out trying to do environmental activism. Right? He is. I think what's underappreciated is just how much environmental activism Doomers are actually engaged in, and a small part of that will be this sort of anti-fossil fuel movement that some of the groups use. But to me, that's a red herring, because we're not going to get rid of fossil fuels, because we would starve 4 billion people if we did, because we need the fertilizer, right, from the Haber-Bosch process. So for me personally, it inspires every day. And, it inspires me to want to care for the world. I volunteer, but I volunteer specifically in ways that I think will benefit life other than humans. So that's
right.
That's
but you're
me,
also
right?
communicating to the world
Right.
quite effectively and informing people about how bad things are. And I would argue you're doing a better job than some climate scientists who think things will be totally fine if all we did was cut back on our fossil fuel use.
So this is something I learned in the casino industry, because honestly, people in the casino industry are idiots. I mean, not all of them. Sorry, not you. Many of them are idiots. They do not understand the mathematics of how their own casinos work, right? They don't have anybody. They don't have a single individual who works there who understands it. And they will tell you, yeah, well, I've been here watching these tables for 30 years. I know how it all works. No, you don't. You don't know a single thing about how this works, right? You don't understand the probabilities. You don't understand long-term impacts of repeated trials, whatever. They don't understand it. And so I kind of have that same feeling in my communication, that I've taken sort of this arrogant tone. Like, I'm just going to say it. Right. I have nothing to lose by just saying it. All right. I can be wrong. I can be right. But I'm going to put it in the terms that are most meaningful to me personally. And oftentimes those terms are harsh. Right. They're in your face. They're using language that is not normally used by academics. And they push narratives. I mean, I have my daily moment of doom and my daily doom quote, right?
Right.
And I treat those as educational. I don't treat them as trying to convert people to be doomers. I say, here is a moment of doom. All right, this is something about our planet that's going on right now that you should add to the body of knowledge you have about the planet. Right.
I don't understand. You said you're about being right or wrong, but you don't make predictions, right? It's like with you say there is a chance, and I
kind of do sometimes. I mean, I have these two fictional things. One's called the Climate 8 Ball, and the other's called the Climate Casino. And the Climate 8 Ball often says things that are a little bit wacky and out there, which you can kind of treat as my half-hearted predictions. And the Climate Casino actually does predict future events. And the Climate Casino is in trouble right now, I have to tell you, because back in 2022, the Climate Casino offered a prop bet, I think with 10-1 odds, that said there would not be a month with global temperatures above 2.0 C, above pre-industrial, before 2027. And at this point, I'm really concerned about December of this year. A lot of people took, yes, there will be such a month side of that fake bet.
But only the doomers, right? Only the stereotypical doomers did that.
So the Climate Casino could go fake broke, fake belly up. This plays out. So yes, I do make predictions, but they're, in a sense, they're always, I always try and use odds in some form for those and never say things as certainties. But yeah, speaking of that, did we mention yet today the brand new records that were set, Leon? Did we mention that? I don't recall.
Should I show it?
If you can.
Yeah, I think it is.
Oh, you're talking about the sea surface? Yeah.
Another record. global sea surface temperatures. And I think when I looked at the data in 2023, it was the first time I could find that I think it was August or September that the northern hemisphere summer, of course, most of the oceans are in the southern hemisphere, that during the northern hemisphere summers, the global sea surface temperatures were higher than in the southern hemisphere during the southern hemisphere summer.
Right.
But now we are there again, and it's a record high.
Oh, yeah. This is since 1982, I think, is how far back the data goes, or 81 in that.
Yeah, and probably more than 120,000 years ago, because even the Eemian, the sea surface temperatures were lower than they are today. I think they were about, I think about 2010, but the same as in around 2010. But now, of course, we are much higher than 2010. So we are higher based. Yeah, of course, it's not a certainty. I don't want to create a doomer headline here, but there is quite a big certainty that the sea surface temperatures globally are now higher than even the last time, the last warm period before the last ice age, and that was when the global sea levels were 6 to 9 meters higher than they are today. So, and then from the perspective here in the Netherlands, right? Is my country doomed? Right? Is it a rational thing to say that if the sea levels rise 7 meters, that our country will be doomed? Much of our country will wind up below the sea. Yeah, I think so. That's based on the observational data and the understanding of the climate of the past.
Yeah. So, that's philosophically here. So I don't consider myself a doomer, and the reason, but I still see the things you see, and I think those things might play out and would be catastrophic. But the difference is, I still think that at least theoretically, the future is still in our hands. I mean, there's a lot that's not in our hands. There's a lot of bad things going to happen at this point. We can't stop. But collapse of civilization, which I think is sort of what we're really talking about, as a benchmark for doom. Not necessarily extinction of the human species, by the way, because people are very resilient, at least in small numbers and with resources and things. But collapse of civilization, I would consider to be pretty bad. So
but wait, Dan. So you're making the bad case, the doomer case, so bad, like the worst case scenario, and you're saying that you're not a doomer because that's your.
No, I'm saying that
straw man, right? It's like you're not a doomer because I don't believe the world's going to end, in a way.
No, I consider collapse of civilization the world ending. I'm not. I'm not.
So that's what I mean. Like you're not a doomer because you don't think civilization is going to end.
No. You didn't understand what I'm saying at all. I'm saying it certainly might end, but it's going to end because of our choices. In other words, if it was like we already hit this physical feedback, there's nothing we can do about it, and it's just a matter of time, which are, by the way, what some doomers actually say, right? Or and this doesn't have to be climate; it could be, the nitrogen cycle is going to go out of whack, whatever, and we're all going to die, or most of us are going to die. I still think that we have choices that we can make, certainly when it comes to climate. And I do focus on climate, by the way, because not that I think these other things aren't really, really bad. It's just that I think that when you prioritize timelines, climate's the one that's going to get us and get all those others too, by the way.
AI is probably going to come first.
Well, we do have the show, Which Will Kill You First, AI, climate change or AI, that I did with Will Wright. So there's that too. And by the way, it's a great example. AI is a great example of, we build technologies that we think has some value. We just go and do it. And we don't think at all about what the negative consequences of those things. Fossil fuels, you could argue we didn't know back then to think about all the negative side effects of fossil fuels. But AI, we do. No one can say we didn't have to
make it.
What?
Those who I think you talked about it already, but those who develop AI say
20% chance it'll kill us all. Yeah,
there's a
people
high,
who make it.
there's a very high chance, much higher than your airplane crashing if you fly on every airplane every day of the year, right?
Yeah.
That it will kill us all. Or
But the point I'm trying to make is that, to me, not being a doomer means we could do something about it. I'm trying to get people to think about what we can do, talk about what we can do, talk about why we don't do it, by the way, which is an interesting subject. In fact, maybe the most interesting subject. And I think if we can take the right steps for climate, which means emissions reduction, it means carbon removal and SRM, that will give us time to maybe deal with some of those other ones. Maybe it won't, but then the doom happens farther out in the future than
Dan,
very soon.
Let me just respond very quickly to that. I agree with you. There are things we could do that would keep global industrial civilization from collapsing. And I've given a list before of the starting things, because as you know, it's going to involve at least a 7 or 8% decrease in CO2 per year going forward to avoid catastrophic warming, climate warming that will hit all these various tipping points. So the first thing we need to do is restrict all travel except for emergency travel or necessary travel for work. No more vacations, no more air flight vacations. So we have to restrict all travel to within essentially walking or biking distance of your house, or to grocery stores when necessary. We have to ban all vehicles from the road except for public transportation and electric vehicles. So absolutely, starting tomorrow, no more fossil fuel vehicles can be on the road. We have to get rid of all beef, primarily, from all stores. The industry has to shut down immediately. I can go on with this list. We have to raise taxes immensely to create infrastructure that will replace fossil fuels and support a geoengineering project. And I mean, you can itemize the list of things that would actually save civilization, right? And when you actually itemize that list, it's like no. I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen, just so we understand each other. But your list is sort of the Green New Deal list.
But I have a different list. I have my own list, and I've done shows on that. But they don't. But I don't list what you list. I list phase out fossil fuels, and by a certain date, like replace electricity in 10 years. Cars in 5.
So how do you create fertilizer then if you're phasing out fossil fuels?
Well, first of all, there's certain things you can't, like flying. Right. Well, by the way, I actually think batteries are going to take over flying way sooner than people think, because we're up to 500 kilowatt hours per kilogram, and we're going to be at 1,000, and all we need is like 400, 500 to make it work. But that's a totally separate thing.
These are different.
You require carbon removal for everything that you don't have a way to get rid of right away, and that would make the carbon removal industry work, right? Because there would be demand finally for it. But again, the problem is fossil fuel emissions. Problem isn't necessarily riding your car, although I totally agree that an EV has environmental impacts way beyond just the fuel source. But if we can get to zero
fossil fuel cars, right?
What was that?
There are over 1 billion fossil fuel cars still driving around.
Yeah, and they're going to have to phase out and whatever. But again, it's way easier.
That sounds easy.
It's way easier to demand the replacement of fossil fuels than it is to change people's lifestyles. Now, they're going to change because those fossil fuels are going to get very expensive as they ramp down and before the replacements are all ready. So there will be some of that. But from a policy point of view, way simpler than what you're proposing. You're setting it up in such a way that it won't possibly happen, is what you're doing. And if you look at my list, it looks like 20 things you could all pass tomorrow. No, I mean you won't, because of fossil fuel interests and corrupt politicians. But just from a policy point of view, it's not that hard. I mean, it's not a big deal.
a techno utopia. You're a techno utopiast or whatever.
No,
Yeah.
I just think I think it will buy us more time, and either we will get educated, and I'm not saying we will, by the way, about what to do in terms of scaling back our impact on the environment, or we won't. But I'd like my kids to have a shot at a safe climate for a little bit longer.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to CO2 this year with El Nino, whether we'll have a huge spike or not, which typically happens during El Nino years. So this year or next, because it has lulled, and every time the rate of increase slows a little bit, you hear from the whole crew, "Oh, we're making progress on CO2 emissions."
Wait, I've got that one.
Oh, do you?
So, by the way, but what's the point you're making though? Is
yeah. Oh yeah. This video just came out yesterday, and he was talking about how people. Yeah. He was talking about this whole myth of inactivism. Like, if you believe that there's something we can do, you will be driven towards inactivism. And that graphs like this that list all of the different climate conferences and events next to the accelerating curve of CO2 tend to make you feel like there's nothing you can do, and therefore make you feel like, well, why should I do anything, right? So he's actually arguing that type of graphic right there is a bad thing to produce. And by the way, I've done several versions of that because it tends to make people feel hopeless. So interesting.
By the way, let's brief break to remind everyone to please like and subscribe, make a comment to the video. By the way, Eliot's Substack is in the video description below. There's links to the articles we've been talking about, and a link to our talk with Eliot 2 years ago. So please like and subscribe. So
I think I also want to show this graph and point out that, okay, it's increasing, but it's also accelerating. But then what many are then saying, like that the emissions have peaked or might have peaked, or they would have been higher in a worst case scenario, right? And I think that's also a bit of a straw man. But then the reason why fossil fuel emissions might not have increased as much as they otherwise would have, it's never attributed. And of course, we've had COVID, we've had fossil fuel wars and crises, and like I would love to see the attribution there, right? Because like how much of it was really because some people came together in Paris and said, okay, maybe we shouldn't emit as much CO2 anymore. What?
No, it's just showing in action. We're talking about doing things and we never do them. I think that's what it's all about. But
the graph is, but I mean the narrative they are building around it. I mean,
so something you mentioned about the El Nino and increasing CO2, but that also points out the fact that if we do SRM, sunlight reflection methods, that will greatly reduce emissions. And this is what happened during Mount Pinatubo. If you take a look at the increase in CO2 every year, year to year, there's a really low amount, maybe the lowest amount of all in 1992. And that's because Mount Pinatubo cooled the Earth by 0.5 degrees, and all of a sudden emissions drop. Because not only is it our physical emissions, from the car and the coal plant, but it's also the feedback emission. Warming causes emissions. And that's part of the ECS, right? The equilibrium climate sensitivity, that warming causes emissions, which cause warming, and warming reduces clouds, which increases temperature, and these feedbacks. So cooling does the opposite. Cooling would create more clouds and also less emissions. So
maybe then that's the type of
the oceans. I mean, cooler oceans, cooler water. Think of your can of Coke, right? Cooler water can hold more gas. Then you heat it up, the gas comes out. So, I mean, that's the dynamic that's going on. But there was a recent, I can't tell you where I saw it, but a recent article that tried to look at that period in the early 1990s that you're talking about it, and actually asked the question, where did all the CO2 goes? And that was one mechanism. They ended up coming up with like 4 different pieces of it.
Yep, absolutely. So and that's why I also argue when people talk about termination shock, says, well, if you don't do SRM, you're guaranteed to have termination shock temperatures for sure, because you're not going to do anything to stop them. But if you do SRM, your termination shock temperatures will be lower than the non-SRM temperatures, because there will be so much carbon removal that happens during the SRM. Anyway,
but so you are in a way. If
we've done shows on that.
If we go back to the doomer story, I think you are then a doomer unless we do SRM.
Well, no, from last week, we did a show on the AMOC is going to collapse due to the rate of temperature change as opposed to the absolute temperature. And then if we do SRM, that could stop it. So you're either pro SRM or you're pro AMOC collapse.
Right.
So yes,
I love that. Yes, you're either with SRM or you are with AMOC. Take your pick. I like that. Yes. Yeah. I mean,
to make it black and white again, right?
I mean, Dan, the question to ask yourself.
Go ahead.
The question to ask yourself before you finally become before you finally come out as a doomer, which we all know you eventually will. The question to ask yourself is, how much progress has actually been made on the ground towards this thing? I mean, do you see a date? Can you point to them already ordering the planes? Are they coming up with the sulfur? I mean, it is in such preliminary points, and the question is, how fast is that progress being made? And I know you went to this show, and all these people you had on your show who are actually doing this research and so on, but the steps on the ground, right, the actual physical steps are so slow right now compared to what's needed. Right, they're progressing so slow, it seems to me. I mean, even when somebody conducts a test, they put a balloon up there and
they're banning the tests.
And then there's this planetary outrage. How dare they? What was that called? Like Golden Sunsets or something was the name.
Making Sunsets. We've had them on the show too.
Sunsets, yeah. Right.
2 guys playing with balloons.
So. Yeah, but the amazing statistic from this, which I double checked myself and checked with a climate scientist because it seems so outrageous, but it could be true, that 1 gram of sulfur dioxide offsets the warming of 1 ton of CO2 for 1 year. 1 gram.
I mean, the obvious thing to do is you need to get dirty fuels again. I mean, that's the easiest solution.
And kill a lot of people, but why not do it the right way? Why not do it the right way?
Over the oceans where no one lives, right? This research has been done in 2013, 2014, right? Someone did his PhD on this, Patanen, and he looked at, if you keep emitting sulfur over the oceans further away from the coast, can you still have some cooling? Yes, and of course that's the only way you can achieve it within years, and to if that is what is needed to keep the AMOC from flowing, we might want to do that. And I don't know. I've talked about it many times. The way maybe you can think of a different word, a type of doomer there, but maybe we need to experience how bad it really is to get our shit together, and then we start to act. Maybe that's why we shouldn't. I think that's one of the strongest arguments against doing SRM. Is that
that's exactly right. That it doesn't incentivize reductions, because once you've taken this step, then that's exactly Michael Mann's argument against it, right?
By the way, I saw a great I can't remember his name, but a Harvard professor talked about this. He said, first of all, we're not cutting emissions because of climate change. We're cutting them because of economics. We're switching to renewables because they're cheap. We're not switching to renewables because they have lower emissions and things like that, for the most part. And it's kind of BS. That whole thing is BS. And if we had policies that implemented SRM, everyone knowing about termination shock, you would think they would also then put in policies to reduce emissions, because that really has to go along with it if you really think about it. Not that we're going to think about it necessarily as well as we should. So I don't buy that argument.
You have to put the data centers.
The moral argument. I put it another way, is that what you want to do is you want people in the global south to suffer from excess heat in order to give wealthy people in developed nations impetus to lower their emissions. That's what you're doing. You want the people in the south to suffer to give us an excuse to lower our emissions.
So you're talking very much in the spirit of Dana Fisher's apocalyptic optimism, right? That when things get bad enough, there will be this grand awakening, the way there was with COVID, how everybody's and I helped the local health centers administer the vaccines, and we had lines that were 12 to 1,500 people long, right? You know, that there will be this grand awakening planet-wide after something serious happens, you know, and suddenly everybody will have this realization, you know, and then you look at what's happened, you know, the repercussions of that socially, that moment in time. And you know, if anything, and Dana Fisher wrote her whole book about apocalyptic optimism based on the success of that, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, Leah Stokes, the person who is the professor of sustainability here at UCSB, just wrote a book about, I think she calls it the green wave, rather than, or something about, you know, instead of a footprint, it's a wave. And it's all about her experience writing the Inflation Reduction Act, which, you know, she views as the greatest piece of environmental legislation in the history of the United States. You know, I mean,
which it might be, but that's still a sad statement. But
well, and also it's been, you know, much of it dismantled, not all of it, she would argue. So, you know, there are these attempts to say we're moving, or there's hope, or there's progress, and you know, you do have elements of Dana Fisher in your point of view, like when it gets bad enough, what other choice?
No, by the way, to be clear, I'm not saying it will. I'm saying it might. And to be honest, doing this for 20 plus years now, giving talks on climate, trying to get people to pay attention, and nothing worked. The only thing that I've seen work a little is climate damage being viewed as climate damage. And that's in the last 5 years, where we've recognized that this is due to climate change. And not that it's caused a lot of action, but it has caused a lot of discussion, which you didn't really have before. And so I think there's a chance that as things get bad, especially when you have relatively simple and cheap solutions available, we might try to do it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, this idea of these attribution studies is relatively new and is getting it gets a lot of mockery online from the right.
But forget that. I mean, just people looking at it and seeing things they've never seen before. In Europe, they've never seen this before. So it's not like, oh yeah, we have these 30 inches of rain in a day, things that happen all the time. No, that's never happened before. And you know,
we've never had inches here.
Was that? It's not inches.
I'm joking.
So how many? A third of a meter or something like that. You know, of rain in a day. That's insane. Nothing can handle that. So those things are happening. They're going to happen more. And after a while, people are going to know it's climate change and might get upset enough to ask their elected leaders to do something.
I mean, they're saying that, you know, next year is going to be a preview of a 2C planet, at least little parts of it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, let's see if a year from now there's some shock to the system that changes the conversation. The climate casino says no. You know, so
well, what is the bet?
The bet will be whether the Republican Party acknowledges climate change. The bet will be whether COP31 has any statement about geoengineering in it.
That I think might already be true. I think that might.
Well,
I'll be interested to see. Let's see if COP31 advocates for geoengineering.
Well, no, advocate's a different thing. You said mention it. Okay, I think.
Okay.
I wonder whether we'll even mention aerosols at all. I don't think so.
No.
So Eliot, give us just your overall view of doomerism, how its value, what advice you give to other people when they're thinking about doomerism.
So I I get the questions a lot, like where should I move, or what should I do, or how do I deal with this grief? I mean, those are really, really challenging questions, and that's where Catherine Ingram was so good, because she had this sort of Zen philosophy about this. I just think it's a profoundly sad time. It's a profoundly sad time to be a human on the planet who's aware of the destruction that's going on, and the ignorance that is sort of being proliferated, even as this acceleration is these things are accelerating. So I'm just work every day to try and stay light, keep the mood light, be funny a little bit, be a little bit off the wall, because I think just by acknowledging that this stuff exists, just by acknowledging that there are people who have these points of view, it gives them a space to not feel alone. It gives them a feeling like, oh yes, there are others out there who also understand this. And I get a lot of emails from people that say, thank you so much for writing that. That's who I am. I've been that way since the 1970s, and I've never had a name for it or understood it, or so it's really worth it for me, as far as my sort of message to the community, to just try and keep it fact-based, keep it light, give resources, encourage community, encourage communication between people, and also at the same time try and figure out where people are getting things wrong. Where is it worse than they're saying? Where is it not as bad as they're saying? Because there's so much noise around these questions, right? So for me, that's also an important thing. It's like, I view myself as a scientist, even though I'm a mathematician, right? Not an engineer, not a physicist, just a pure mathematician, just to look at this stuff with that sort of austere perspective of mathematics, and then try and cut off the crap and give the rest in a form that's as easy to digest as possible. And for me, it's kind of, I always have this philosophy in the casino industry, and I have it in this industry, in the climate world as well, that knowledge serves the greatest good in the public domain, right? Knowledge serves the greatest good in the public domain. So if there is just knowledge that you can put out there, objective, just knowledge, that you owe it to do that, right? That's a good in and of itself, right? It doesn't need to have an agenda. It doesn't need to have a goal or a point of view. Knowledge itself is good enough. And so I bring a lot of that to what I do as well. So I think I'll leave it there.
Great. Well, I really appreciate all you do online to inform us all. And and that is very, very helpful. And also for being very straightforward about doomerism and everything. I think it's an important voice or attitude that people have to understand, and they can choose to go there or go other places. But I think it still helps inform, and it's not as bad as denial, by the way. I'll throw that in there right now. I'll throw that right in. Let's go to let me get up here and grab some stuff here. Get Stacy ready. Stacy, where are you? There you are.
I just want to say, I think
there
Eliot
we go. Stacy, welcome.
Oh my gosh, you guys are so good to see you all. Yeah, this was a good one. Just a few notes. This is the second time you've done it, Dan. The gargantuan lie that is collapsing the world's climate. I can't believe you skip out on getting to say gargantuan. That's the title of Adam's article. And speaking of articles,
2 weeks from now.
Yeah. Speaking of articles, Eliot, they only show the titles because no one reads articles, right? No. So,
I hope some people read mine once in a while.
You're the only one. Yeah.
Oh, and George T. You have to read this too.
Yes.
There are some other headlines.
Yeah, there's a few others. Yes.
I know that you guys visited this, at the beginning, the middle, the end, whatever, your doomer list. But Eliot, you said you wanted to add someone, and Leon said, "Oh, it's Nature Magazine," and then Dan threw in Jesus. But I think recently you've said that Catherine Hayhoe is a doomer.
Yeah.
Is that who you wanted to add? And if so, why?
Well, I mean, the question is, and I cannot answer this, is she an evangelical Christian who believes that we are in the end of days? And I don't know that about her. I know that publicly she advocates for stewardship of the planet, for the whole sort of, Christian ecological identity. But, very specifically, if you ask for her religion and what those beliefs are in terms of the near-term return of Jesus, in terms of the rapture and all those things, I mean, if she has the perspective that this is happening soon, and just like a doomer like me has the perspective it's going to happen soon. It might not be this decade or this century, but over the course of the next 100 years, we'll lose the AMOC. Over the course of the next 50 years, we'll lose the Arctic. We're going to lose the Amazon. We're going to lose the coral. We're going to have a permafrost methane bomb. It's a gradual process. So if she has a belief that she is just biding time, and eventually this is going to happen, I mean, how is that not a doomer? How is that anything else but a doomer? I mean, if you promote that evangelical Christian belief to other people, you are promoting inactivism, pure and simple.
Okay. Hey, let's go to Eli now, and then Stacey will be back to you in a moment.
Yeah.
Hey, Eli.
Thanks, Dan. So, all of this is extrapolating trends, and we know that the trends that we're on are do not look good when you look at enough of the details. However, there are a lot of those trends have themselves are built on assumptions, so it kind of feeds on itself, and it can be a little bit circular. And one of the inherent assumptions is that there won't be any discontinuous changes that break the premises of the trends. And granted, there would be political hurdles to overcome, but implementing SRM at the same time as implementing and scaling CDR so that we don't acidify the oceans, and improving our efficiency at resource utilization to support the population that we have, with perhaps also continuing the gradual decline trend of human population, maybe not. If we add, I've put a bunch of things on the table there. If we also add deliberate efforts to restore ecology, I think we could have, and I'd like your view on this, better restoration of functioning ecology and nature and avoiding mega extinction have a much higher likelihood than have civilization as we know it collapse, have runaway climate change, and then maybe that settles back and nature restores itself over tens of thousands of years. So compare the two.
I'm not sure what two I'm comparing. I did understand at the start that you were sort of like, I gave my list of things that could solve it, and Dan gave his list. That your list is more or less consistent with Dan's. But I mean, the important thing that you brought up there right at the beginning is this idea of what's called gradualism. And, in geology, that was a commonly held paradigm that nothing on the planet happens fast. Everything happens on these sort of geological time scales of tens of thousands to hundreds of millions of years, right? For large changes to happen. And then, of course, the planet gets hit by an asteroid, and there's these other, very short-term events, these catastrophic events that change things. And so the argument about the current state of the planet today is, are we going to hit one of these tipping points that's going to essentially be defeat this sort of the climate's gradually getting worse. The AMOC will gradually slow. The coral will gradually die. I mean, the point is that the current thing that's happening is a catastrophic change because of the rate of change, right? We are witnessing a catastrophe right now. on similar timescales to getting hit by a giant space rock. The only question is, within that 100 or 200 years sort of, human timescale gradualism, whether we will hit something that's even faster and more of a shock. And there are obviously several of those on the horizon. A blue ocean event, a catastrophic methane release from Siberia and the Siberian Arctic, the Thwaites Glacier suddenly collapsing and huge sea level rise, happening very quickly. Those are the sorts of global catastrophes that everything else is gradual on human lifetime timescale. So I think for me, when you were explaining those things, that's what stood out for me was this sort of idea that we have these solutions, but these solutions assume gradualism on human timescales, and that may not be what actually.
No, you're adding that. We can, if we were determined, we could implement SRM pretty quickly in a few years to arrest the progress. Now, there's much more to do to restore things, but the first order of business is arresting the progress to minimize the chance that we go over any of those tipping points. And as we do that, we can scale up again with the determination to do so, to do those other things, remove the excess carbon dioxide, improve the efficiency with which we support ourselves. We are horribly inefficient about how we support our civilization because we're not optimizing for efficiency. We're optimizing for what's fast and cheap, right? So there is huge room for improvement there. And, if we were to become good stewards of our planet, we could go on from there to restore ecology. And the point that I was getting to is both you and I would really like to see nature flourish rather than face this accelerating mega extinction event. And so that's where I was going, driving at with all of this, that we could get to something better much sooner than going through all of the misery of civilizational collapse and mass extinction to have eventually nature, restore itself on its own without us.
Yeah, I think we can, but the question is, we're not doing it. I mean, that's why I'm not a doomer. I think we theoretically could do these things. However, if you ask me, are we going to do these things? I do think we're going to try SRM just because it's fast and cheap, but we're not doing much of anything right now, knowing what we know, and that's a pretty scary thought. Right?
Well, but the first step is to not dismiss the possibility, but rather to understand that the possibility exists and that it is actually more feasible than people who just shove it off the table would have us believe.
Right, but that's why we spend a lot of time on this show, not just talking about climate science and climate solutions, but also about psychology and communication, doomerism, and the subjects about getting the public engaged, and they're not really engaged. Let's, Stacy, do we have some a few?
We do. Although I wanted to tag on to that with Tom's comment. If we encourage Israel and Iran to up the ante, couldn't we hit at least half the items on Eliot's wish list?
What?
I think that's he was saying about the things that we must do, like your list, but his is much more severe.
A global nuclear war or something?
Well, I don't know how far he's suggesting.
Let's go on from that. Let's go on from
that. So the one is a fundamental thing, and that is, isn't being a doomer just facing reality? Is it as bad as we fear? And if so, why not just rebrand yourself and call yourself a climate realist?
Good question. I like that. Yeah.
So I was using the phrase climate realist with anyone who didn't like the word doomer. And then I discovered two problems with that. One is that it uses the word climate, which is not necessarily what it means to be a doomer. It's sort of like saying you're a climate doomer. No, you're a climate realist. It shrinks the academic space for that thing to exist. But the other is that the right wing has already adopted climate realists. They've already hijacked that phrase. And a climate realist now means somebody who realizes that climate change is a hoax. And you can find that out there in the, it's actually been sort of, what do they call that? It's just been it's already been taken away from us as an option.
Well, grab it back, but okay.
Well, but I'm not as loud. I don't have as loud a megaphone to try and drown out that right-wing noise.
How about an environmental realist? Would that cover you broadly enough?
There is a problem with the word doomer. I mean, you kind of think of Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, right? With, you're kind of just sad and, your tail's, you're gray. I don't think, I think it's okay to have that word and then try and live the life that displays what you mean by it and have that be true for you. I do wish there was a better word, and Gail Zawacki had a word. I think she called it themist, Themist. I don't exactly recall what that was about, but it had some reference to Greek mythology or ancient art or something like that. So that was her word. The diva of doom wanted to rebrand as well. So I do agree with the sentiment.
Okay. What else, Stacey?
It's from David. Assuming humanity does not go extinct, how do we guarantee that the destruction of the natural world will not happen all over again once we rebuild our world after the collapse, or is it too late?
I wish the climate 8-ball could look tens of thousands of years into the future. It has a limited time horizon, and the climate casino refuses to take wagers that won't be settled within my lifetime. So, that thought has occurred to me. If humans are innately destructive to the planet as part of our evolutionary genetics, this will repeat, or it'll just always exist at some lesser level. I mean, the truth is that humans have been causing extinctions for 10,000 years, right? That humans dating back to Easter Island, where they used up all the available resources on the island and then went extinct, right? So this is certainly just part of human evolution, that we are creatures who are going to use the resources available to us to make our lives better in whatever way we can. And I think all animals are like that, right? All animals will take the available resources they can within what their way of living allows. And so I think it might repeat a few times. We might get a little bubble like that, a little wave. We had the Romans. We've had mega civilizations in the past that have come and gone. So we are just another iteration of that, albeit obviously the most destructive of them. So I mean, the real thing is, will there be enough fossil fuels left over after we ravage every available resource on the planet to repeat this? I mean, that would be a question. A possible limiting factor. If we rape all the lithium and oil there is, I mean, I guess
there's a lot of lithium, by the way.
Yeah, we'll come up with a perpetual motion machine of some sort.
And we're moving to salt batteries now.
So in a way, they're asking you to answer the Fermi paradox, but
right.
It is.
By the way, Eliot, you had in your article a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson: "The end of the human race will be that it will eventually die of civilization."
I love that quote. I couldn't believe it. I mean, what a quote.
Yeah.
It will eventually die of civilization. Civilization is a disease, right? And this idea is actually fairly common, that civilization is a cancer on the planet. And this one author, Warren Hearn, who, by the way, was the first legal abortion doctor in the country in the 1970s, and he's in Colorado. He wrote a book just recently called Homo Ecophagus, where he's actually talks about human cancer. We are a cancer, and he looks at cancer cells and how they have like the little spidery things that go out, and he compares those to the layout of major metropolitan areas, right? And I mean, they look very, very similar, right? So there's like these skin cancers. We are little bits of skin cancer on top of the surface of the planet. So so I think that's
well, that's what you call yourself, right? You call yourself the kind of doomer you are. So humans are a cancer on the planet.
Cancer doomer. Yeah, humans are a cancer on the planet doomer. Right. I do concur with that perspective that we grow, right? We consume resources. We damage whatever natural thing we grow on, and that growth can't be natural. Can't be stopped through any natural process. It'll have to only stop when we hit some limits of the organism itself.
But if you could go back, did it have to be that way? I mean, I don't want to think of myself as just the pine bark beetle or whatever,
No, you're cancer.
No, you're a cancer, part of a cancer cell. You're just.
And I don't think that's going to catch on though as a major.
I also don't identify as
people don't like to think of themselves that way.
No,
do you have one more question?
Yeah, I had. Well, let's see. Oh, yeah. This was from Tom's. You've heard, Eliot. You've heard the quote: "Planet Earth is a resort for like 500 rich people, and the rest of us are just the staff." What year will this no longer be the case? And will elites try to solve global warming then? Sounds like a good bet.
So this idea that the top 1% consume the same amount as, I don't know, the bottom 50% or whatever the equation is on that.
Twice as much as the bottom 50%.
The demographic that consumes the most on the planet is the 60 to 90%. Right. So if you live in America, you are already in the top 40% of, or top 10% of consumers. So you can't just blame it on the elite, because the total consumptive power of all of America throughout the elite, all of the UK throughout the elite, all of Europe, all of Australia, right? All of China throughout the elite. If you take away that 1%, right, the contributions of those people who are just living comfortable, normal lives, and I don't even have to say comfortable, they're living hungry, suffering, normal lives in first world countries, absolutely dwarfs this little bit of elite. And yes, we all hate, the 1%, right? They are another straw man out there. But the actual problem is the entirety of what civilization is. It's not just that civilization has produced these horrible, horrible billionaires, which should never have happened. I absolutely agree. But getting rid of that is not a solution in any respect.
You'll have the next 500 richest people.
Yeah, there you go.
But by the way, it's all the 80-20 rule.
Yeah, you have to get.
That is fine. That is fine.
You can stop at the person above me.
Anyway, Eliot, I want to thank you again, and I want to remind everyone that if you enjoyed this program, to check out our first discussion with the Doomer program from 2 years ago. Link is in the description. Also in the description is a link to Eliot's Substack, a link to the article that we were discussing today, Eliot's Twitter and Blue Sky and things like that. So I just want to thank you again for all the how informative you are to the environmental and climate communities, and also for making it fun too, with the Climate Casino and the attitude that you have to take a very, very serious subject and try to make it something that you can imagine talking about, and not just feeling horrible about all the time. So thank you for that. And it's great to have you on the show again. And I want to thank everyone who participated. Thank you. And Leon, Stacy, and Eli, and everyone who left comments and questions. Again, please like and subscribe, because we'll get to share this with more people. It's free. And with that, I want to thank everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.